Welcome to the eCom Collab Club Podcast, where e-commerce founders and operators share the mistakes that drained their cash, wasted their time, and nearly broke their brains, so you could avoid that pain.
Fucking great. No one ever listens to me.
Hosted by Adam Pearce, co-founder of the eCom Collab Club, and Blend Commerce, the Shopify CRO agency.
Well, hello guys, welcome back to the eCom Collab Club podcast. And today's guest has built brands in some of really the most competitive consumer markets out there. So from subscription pioneers like Birchbox to global names like Playboy, and now as CMO of the Clothes Doctor, a brand that's proving you don't always have to sell more products to build a bigger business. Now, she believes acquisition and retention aren't two separate strategies, and they're really the same conversation, because if you attract customers with discounts, over promises and flashy ads, you shouldn't really be surprised, well, when they disappear just as quickly as they've arrived. Now, today we're going to be talking about where the first purchase sets up the second, what subscription businesses understand that most e-commerce brands still don't, why customer experience is everyone's responsibility, and how to build customers who actually want to come back. And somewhere along the way, we're also going to be finding out what it was like organizing Hugh Hefner's 80th birthday party. And in a minute, we'll meet Janis Thomas right after this.
I would love to help you with a free 15-minute session to talk about you and your space and help you out.
While you're building your audience, High Level is building your business behind the scenes.
I would love to help you with a free 15-minute session.
Because when your audience grows, so do the messages. While you're creating, High Level's conversation AI keeps every new lead moving. The moment a follower reaches out, conversation AI is already responding, trained to know the details of your business, with your tone and style built in. Whether it's text messages, Instagram DMs, or even WhatsApp, Conversation AI learns your business, answers questions, and books appointments automatically. Let Conversation AI handle the day-to-day, so you have more time to be you.
Visit gohighlevel.com/ecom collab club for an extended free trial.
Well, Janis, first of all, thank you so much for coming back. I'm surprised that you did, but great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
No, it's a pleasure. And look, I mean, some of the people listening probably will have caught you at the last eCom Collab Club, which was a really great session where I know you were talking a lot about subscriptions. And obviously today we're going to cover some of that too. What I wanted to do really is dive straight in, because ultimately it's a big one, and it's your conversations that you have when you speak on stages and when you do podcasts like this. You talk a lot about this kind of acquisition and retention not being two separate jobs. And what I wanted to start off with is that, why do you think so many businesses still treat them like they're separate entities with realistically kind of different teams, different goals?
Well, I think fundamentally you've got this issue with marketing, the point that it grows beyond a one-person job. You have to split it in some way, shape or form. And I think just that idea of like, acquiring customers and retaining customers, they're different skill sets, they're potentially different functions, kind of those things. It's one of those things on paper, it seems to make a lot of sense. And then you split them out and then you start growing teams, and then those teams are pulling in different directions. And that's where things come unraveled. But I think however you split up a marketing team, if it's by channel, if it's by function, like whatever you do, you're going to inherently have overlap between them. And fundamentally, it's about building a team that pulls together in the same direction and collaborates and supports each other, however you divide that team.
And I mean, in terms of that division as well, on that point, do you think that this is something that is still getting driven from top down in terms of like C-suite level? And obviously on the flip side, do you think the marketers are trying to push for more of, I guess, a full life cycle view? Or do you think both are sort of resisting that more generally?
I think it's one of those things that tends to be we've always done it like this. We've always split acquisition and retention, and it actually takes, and particularly once you've gone down that route, it's then very hard to restructure the team on a different basis. So I think what it tends to be is we've always split acquisition and retention, and it's too much of a faff to undo it than necessarily, and I think it takes somebody who really understands the journey to purchase and how to effectively run marketing teams. Because as I was saying before, it's like, how do you build collaboration no matter how you divide your marketing team? And from my point of view, it always, splitting acquisition and retention, it seems really simple on paper, but then you end up pulling the business into competing directions potentially.
Because the other thing for me is that, in the work that I've done sort of in agency world, a few years ago, we really tried to get our clients to focus on LTV. And in all honesty, it was a fail. We found it really difficult to get the businesses to adopt that, because it almost felt like as if what acquisition and retention teams weren't willing to use that as kind of the metric that defined them. Is that, I think, still part of the problem in terms of, acquisition have one set of metrics and retention have another?
I think it's part of it. I think it's also about when you're trying to make decisions in the short term based on a long-term value. And it's quite hard to be like, oh, I'm making this decision now because I think I'll see a return in 6 months, 12 months time. You can typically make a case either way, and you're not going to know for a very long time whether you were right or not. So it is inherently quite a difficult way to manage things. But yes, I think particularly a lot of businesses run into problems because they are focused on acquisition, and acquisition is based on volume and not the quality of those customers. And your business will run out of steam very quickly if you're acquiring poor quality customers. And it's very difficult when you're making a decision based on acquisition cost, that how much should you be spending to acquire a customer is very much dependent on what that lifetime value of that customer is going to be. So it's very easy when you're running acquisition to get seduced by quick wins, but you're not going to find out for some time that those customers were not your usual quality and all of those things. And you've spent, what is in hindsight, too much acquiring them. So it is I think looking at the customer's lifetime value holistically is incredibly difficult, and it requires a lot of data and effort. And I think in many ways things are getting better, because if you go back 5 years, everyone believed that last click data in universal analytics, and it was just easy to measure. It wasn't accurate or helpful, and it meant particularly that we valued channels that drove conversion and not things that actually drove lifetime value, drove growth, kind of all of those things. So I think in kind of almost by accident, Google has made it harder for us to measure last click, which has made us take more of a step back to be like, actually, how do we measure the value of our marketing spend?
Absolutely. I think, look, on the data point as well, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about that later on too. And I think one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on is that when obviously we were at the eCom Collab Club last time, we had obviously John there, one of the co-founders of Craft Gin Club. And he was obviously talking quite openly about the fact, look, as a business, they ran a heck of a lot of discounts. And ultimately, that did not lead to a healthy business that they, I guess, wanted. And, look, you get all the time, that brands like Craft Gin, they'll run a 30-40% discount. They give the meta ads, they get these flood of new customers, and it's whoa, great. And then you kind of get 6 months down the line and none have come back. When brands do that, is it the discount itself that causes them an issue? or is it actually everything that happens afterwards that is the real crux of the matter?
I think you've got two potentially separate issues there. One, you have, does the customer actually value the product? You know, that they think that it's worth, if they're paying £25 a month for something that's normally 50, do they think it's worth £50? Like that's fundamentally the kind of biggest question, is like, is it actually worth it? And I think you can use discounts successfully, because you're like, oh, do you know what, this is totally worth £50. I would totally continue even though I'd got a discount. And then inherently with subscription, there have been a lot of bad actors within subscription. A lot of people don't want to get tied into subscription. So if you're doing subscription well, I genuinely believe you make it as easy as possible for people to leave, and then they're really, really likely to come back at a later date. So your metrics need to be okay with, I got someone, they cancelled, they came back later. So there are kind of multiple facets at play, and I'm not against discounts per se, but it's about, does that make that customer like devalue the product? Like, particularly having worked a lot in streaming, there used to be a huge trend, which I think Netflix has almost entirely knocked on the head. But, you know, going back 10 years, get your first month free. It's like, well, then you wouldn't actually end up watching anything because you hadn't paid anything for it. So you didn't value it. So then the trial just expired and you never came on as a full price customer. Whereas even if you paid some money, you were then like, oh, actually, well, I've paid for this, so I better use it. And then you see, do you have value? But it comes back to that idea of discounts themselves are not inherently acquiring a bad customer, but you've got to make the customer feel like they would be willing to pay full price after that discount.
Because I suppose on that note, with the Clothes Doctor, and do you guys run meta ads for Clothes Doctor currently?
Oh, yes.
And I suppose my question on that front is that in terms of doing that, do you lead with single purchase or subscription on that? And do you discount it? And maybe yes, or I guess kind of what's the rationale for that kind of lead that you have on Meta?
So most of the ads that we run on Meta are for our 2 subscription products because of the acquisition cost versus the lifetime value of those. We don't run any Meta specific discounts. We have 2 key subscription products, and the deal is consistently the same. So for our quarterly product, which is essentially kind of all the things that you need to care for your clothes for the upcoming season, that box is typically discounted by about 30 to 40%, but that is then the price you pay and the value you get every single quarter. So that is not unique to you as a new customer. That is the value that you will always get. And with Everyday Laundry, which is our refillable, sustainable detergent and conditioner, with that, it's £30, and as part of that, your first box, you get the refillable glass bottles. You get a package that is essentially setting you up for your subscription. So yes, we do discount, but we don't do any Meta specific discounts, if that makes sense.
Because I think this is the thing, as you're talking, it kind of seems to me as what you're saying is that you need to, when you're dealing with subscriptions, you need to kind of, create this sort of habit forming behavior. And I think I guess my interpretation, what you're saying is that if you bring discounts into that then go away, you're kind of disrupting that relationship then, aren't you? In that habit that you're sort of trying to form.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I want you to feel like it's good value, but I want you to feel like it's always good value. And I think particularly with Everyday Laundry, our detergent and conditioner product, we've actually been playing around with how we communicate that free setup set that you get at the beginning, because actually where we've had some issues I think with acquisition is people were saying, oh, okay, your first box is worth £90, and people are like, oh, am I going to then pay £90 after my first box? And it's like, no, you're always going to pay £30. It's always going to be £30. So like how we've played around with a different language about how we communicate that to make it really, really clear.
Yeah.
And
no,
ironically,
like that.
that's about downplaying the value of what they get.
No, absolutely. Rather than over egging it, and I think kind of creating expectations that ultimately will never be fulfilled against. You mentioned something sort of previously as well. You were kind of saying, look, you get that sort of promise that gets someone to click and add. Isn't always, I suppose, the experience they really get when they land on the website, or indeed when they actually get their order. What do you think the biggest disconnect or issue that there is when you've got brands who obviously make that promise and then what the customer actually experience? Like, where does it break the most effectively?
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time with, let's not name any specific brands, but, certain very high profile Far East brands who you see something and you think, oh, that looks great, and the price is too good to be true. And then it turns up and it's absolute tat. That is the perfect example of, it's like you get what you pay for. And I think that can actually end up shooting you in the foot, because you're like, well, why is it so cheap? It's got to be rubbish. So you've got to be really careful with that. And I think sometimes the disconnect isn't even intentional. It's like thinking about things like landing pages. I think particularly with Meta now having this idea of creative as targeting, and you're going to have lots of different messages that you're going to communicate with people. Well, then what's your landing page experience for that particular angle that you're communicating? I think it's very easy to be like, oh, we're going to put out an ad for this person who's particularly interested in the power of the cleaning of the detergent, but then is that then the message that they see when they land on the homepage? And actually thinking about, well, how do I then have the right landing page experience for that creative becomes increasingly important. As like typically, I'm hearing for, kind of brands that are spending a lot of money on Meta need to be doing more than 500 creatives a month. That means you're going to have quite a lot of different messaging for different people. And if you're sending them all to the same landing page, then some of those people are naturally going to be disappointed.
No, do you know what? It's really, that really hits home me, because I think, ultimately, every company, I think, has multiple jobs to be done with their product, don't they? And I guess that must be one thing for the Clothes Doctor, in that, some people are coming for the job to be done, that they want to be more ethically conscious about the way they wash their clothes. Others are doing it because ultimately they're looking for an alternative to the mainstream stuff. Others are doing it because they want to avoid the chemicals. If you're using those different landing page approaches, how do you then get the rest of the site to sync in with that? Like that must be quite, I guess, tricky to do.
Yeah, I think it's thinking about that journey to purchase, which again, like when you don't fragment these things, it's much easier to do. So I think for us, because we don't run ads for, we do on Google, we do run ads for everything, but particularly Meta, we run it particularly for 2 products. So we're like, okay, you're going to come in for this product. There might be some upsell around it, but actually, we're going to think about how we're going to communicate to you after you've purchased, and think about how you're going to navigate. We've changed our navigation recently to being like, okay, where are the places you're potentially going to want to go if you've come in on a PDP? Like, how do you navigate to the relevant parts of the rest of our site and things like that? And just really thinking it through from the customer perspective, because that's what a marketing team should be doing, is thinking about the customer and the customer journey. And it's very difficult when you end up with big teams with very siloed responsibilities being like, oh, that's somebody else's problem.
Yeah, it's one of the things, like in CRO we talk about quite a bit in terms of signposting and hand-holding, and I think that a lot of the time the work that's done within kind of the CRO space tends to be around that, because people genuinely I think that they're pretty poor at being able to do that, because ultimately I think when you're that close to the brand, you kind of say, well, look, it's a fantastic product, and we've got all this fantastic marketing goes with it, but it's those basic steps, like you say, of where is the next click? How can I find more about this particular thing that I need? Which is why I think, sometimes CRO, from my point of view, can be a little bit underwhelming, because ultimately it's like you say, it's those making those changes in the main navigation that get people to where they need to be. But fundamentally, that's what it is. I mean, on the subscriptions front, look, you've worked with some fantastic subscription brands, and ultimately, like we said at the start there, they kind of live and die by keeping customers around. If you think about sort of one thing that subscription brands do well, any Shopify brand, even if they don't sell subscriptions, is there a way of thinking or a process or something that they do on site that you think every ecom brand could steal or use?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that you don't want to acquire poor quality customers. When you run a subscription brand, you're like, there are people I don't want. I don't want somebody who is super cheap, that is going to cost me more in the long run. And there's no point that I acquire poor quality subscribers and my churn goes through the roof, and kind of all of those things, which in a traditional ecom brand, being like, do you know what, you might actually want to reduce your conversion rate, is like a real kind of shocking thing to say to people. And I think particularly with subscription, you want someone who's bought into the idea of your product on an ongoing basis. You don't want someone who's just discovered you and decided to buy on a whim. That you actually would prefer that somebody potentially visited your site 2 or 3 times before they made that decision to purchase, because they understand the brand and the proposition and kind of why they would want it and why they want to keep it before they make the purchase. So that, I think, is quite an alien concept to e-commerce brands, and it's something that I found when I've worked in straight e-com really, really helpful. But I'm like, well, as long as a visit to your site has value, that they, read some content, they understand a bit more about your brand or your products, or, even what your returns policy is, or, any of those things, if they understood a little bit more about you, that visit was not wasted. That visit was an investment in your future growth. And that's very much how, as a subscription business, you would look at it. And I think more e-com brands could take that view. It's like, well, how do I make sure that a visit has value? Like, I've recommended brands to people that I've never actually bought, but I've got an understanding of, what their offering is and why their products are great and all of those things. And it's like, oh, you should try this. I've never actually tried it myself, but I know this, this, and this about it. And if you looked at that from a straight e-com lens, you'd say my visits had no value, whereas actually they led to potentially a high value conversion.
So no, I haven't just gone and done a quick outfit change, which much so I'd like to, but this is an ad. Now, as many of you know, when I'm not interviewing e-commerce legends, like on this very show today, I am running Blend Commerce, the CRO Shopify agency. And really over the past 10 or so years, we have been working with over 350 Shopify brands and helping them get customers to buy more, buy now, and buy again. So if you are a brand that is looking at how to make real impact on your Shopify store by increasing your revenue per session, well, we're the guys to talk to. And recently, we've just been crowned the Global CRO Agents of the Year 2026. Now, if you want to know exactly where you guys are from perspective of buy now, buy more, and buy again, all you need to do is go ahead to blendcommerce.com and click on the top right hand corner where you will see a link to CRO benchmarks. In there, you can enter some details and we'll tell you exactly where you are and what you need to do.
So Janis, with Clothes Doctor, you're kind of in this interesting position, aren't you? Because a lot of businesses out there are sort of trying to convince people to buy more. You're helping people make sure that what they have lasts longer. How have you sort of had to change the way you think about lifetime value and what, I suppose, ultimately good marketing looks like?
Yeah, so I think for me, it comes down to, why do people want this why should people want this product? What does it do? And I think from a marketing team's perspective, if you're really clear why your business exists and why people should care, that then flows into everything that you do. So for us, I mean, one of the things that we will be quite happy to say is we think that people should wash their clothes less often. It's like, we sell detergent, but we think that you should wash your clothes less often, because ultimately we're about your clothes staying looking new for longer. And actually one of the most damaging things you can do is unnecessarily overwash your clothes. And we'll say, let's be really honest. We'll say, well, actually, do you know what? You should use this spray to refresh your clothes rather than wash it. So we're not saying don't use any product at all. We're just saying wash is shouldn't necessarily be the default. And I think for us, it's really interesting because laundry is the ultimate system one thinking, as far as I'm concerned. It is the thing that people do on autopilot. They do not think about it. So because of that, it actually takes something big to disrupt that behavior, to make people think about, oh, actually, maybe I shouldn't just be throwing all of my clothes into the wash without thinking about it. And, maybe I shouldn't just be buying a big plastic bottle filled mostly with water and artificial thickeners instead of buying a refillable detergent. Like all of these things, you've got to make people think. So you've got to say something that really makes them stop and reconsider.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing as well is it feels like as well is that you kind of internally need to have that conviction and be able to portray that, I guess, in all of your marketing, your comms, in order for them to believe it. And I think, sometimes we talk about subscriptions and, you've got to move away from subscribe and save, and there's more to it. And I think sometimes when people try and do that, unless there is actually a process that you're trying to get the customer to buy or a habit form, it's quite tricky to do that, I think, and do it convincingly.
Yeah, I think we've had this conversation before, but I think brands are like, oh, I want to introduce subscription because I want to get my lifetime value up. And it's like, yes, but why would the customer want to subscribe to this product? What benefit is there to subscription as opposed to buying it when you need it?
You mentioned earlier on about this. We're talking obviously about sort of about acquisition and retention, and look, you've got sort of your paid media chasing rush, you've got CRM, repeat purchases, the customer service team dealing with obviously the complaints and the operations sort of trying to keep up. You've got all these different people. How do you get all those teams sort of rowing in the same direction?
I think the biggest thing is having a clear vision and communicating it, which sounds really, really simple, but is actually incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I think somebody said something recently about marketing being the most optimistic function of the business. And it's like, I think you have to believe in a brighter future to be a good marketing leader. You can't be like, well, this might not work, but we'll do it anyway. It doesn't work. So that leadership, that vision, that optimism, that bringing people on board is really important. And I find it difficult, this idea that CMO is like one of the highest turnover roles in the business, where it's the thing that the business needs most is a clear vision, clearly communicated, and then having those results kind of reflected back to the business, being like, we said we were going to do this is what we did, this is what the outcome was. And that stuff takes time, but that belief, you look at brands over time that have had that clear vision, the growth that they've managed to achieve long term. So it's very easy to be like, oh, we had a vision, but it didn't deliver results in the short term. So we binned the CMO and we brought somebody in and they've got a new vision. And then, nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the time, again, when we're at eCom Collab Club, we don't often go and talk too much about this. And with each of these different, sort of the longevity of these different positions, and I think equally the importance of each of these positions each different departments working together. Just in terms of, I guess, your experience of an eCom, do you think the brands that are at that kind of, sort of like £1 to £5 million mark, or $1 to $5 million, let's say, as well, is there a particular function where you think there is still a lack of investment and a lack of time being invested in that? Because look, I think that when we were at eCom Collab Club, we always tend to go to the sort of the front end, the sexy end of eCom. But is there part of eCom that you think, look, people still don't put enough time in, they don't put enough people into XYZ function?
I think fundamentally, if you're not able to fulfill orders, then all of it is completely moot. Well, that is always important. And I think that expectation of the customer, and like in my last role, we had a fulfillment partner who was really good, super reliable. And basically, if you'd placed an order sort of by about 4 o'clock, typically it was shipped out that day. And, it would often arrive with the customer, within a day or two, even if it wasn't sent like express delivery. And so when we asked customers, when did your order arrive? Was it before, you expected, when you expected, or after you expected? And something like 95% of people would say it arrived when or before I expected it. But then that meant we had very few people getting in touch with customer services saying, where's my order? So while our fulfillment partner was not cheap, it actually was good value overall, because we were spending less money on customer services. And I think it's very easy for businesses to be like, oh, but this fulfillment partner, they're expensive, and we could save, tens of thousands of pounds by going with this cheaper option. But it's then the impact of customer care, and like, are those customers going to come back versus the ones who had a delightful experience? And I think it's easy not to look at decisions from a holistic perspective, particularly if a particular department is responsible for making that decision that then has a knock-on impact elsewhere. And I think it is about building that culture of collaboration and sharing, and feeling that we're all in it together, and we all celebrate each other's wins, and we share in the learnings that we've made, and all of those things. And building that culture of continuous improvement is where brands grow. It's when they, it's like, oh, we, made a mistake, don't let anyone else know, whereas actually that's a learning experience for the whole company. And so that, like, building a culture of growth is about collaboration and sharing and celebrating each other's achievements.
Yeah, and I think you easily can scan LinkedIn every day and find someone banging on about unit economics and all this kind of stuff, which to be fair has to be done. But I think you make a really good point here. I think that I don't see people think about a lot is that kind of opportunity cost that you don't think about. And the fact that, like you say there, particularly on the fulfillment side, is that it's the money that you don't end up losing because of those mistakes that inevitably happen, and then the impact on the LTV. And I still think like that. It's interesting for me is that, look, we have a lot of, logistics and operation suppliers that come along to eCom Collab and talk about it. And unfortunately, I still feel like the lead there is still tend to be on price. I mean, but ultimately, I guess like it is because so many brands focus on that element rather than that sort of quality of delivery and, like you said there, that customer satisfaction, which ultimately does get you a higher LTV and ultimately grows a company.
And the irony is most people, when they switch fulfillment supplier, do it because they've had a bad experience with their existing one. It's not normally purely price driven. It's because, my existing supplier is not delivering the service I want for my customers. Oh, let me go and see if I can find someone cheaper is not the solution.
No, it really doesn't make sense. And love that. So I want to ask you a question here, actually. If let's say, for example, we had someone listening who's got sort of, doing about £10 million Shopify brand. If you were, I guess, helicoptered in, you got 90 days to improve retention. Not necessarily what would you do first, but where would you be looking? And then what are then off the back of that typically the low-hanging fruit pieces that people tend to overlook?
I would first of all be looking at their acquisition messaging. What are they saying, and what's then the experience of the customer? Do they deliver what they promise? And the other thing that I would be looking at is like, well, what's what's your, particularly CRM? It's like, well, what's your experience when you sign up to email and once you've made a purchase, and kind of all of those things. And that's always the low hanging fruit and the easiest place to start. But yeah, I think like how you acquire customers is absolutely crucial for retention. And if you're promising things that people don't deliver, then you're just going to get people who are disappointed.
It sounds like rubbish in, rubbish out kind of situation here, really, when you kind of put it that way. And I think that's not something that tends, we always have this, and I guess even my question there, look, it's trying to separate the two out.
I was just going to say, I think one of the first things I did when I started in my previous role was I talked to our highest value customers, and really about like, how did they discover us and what was our journey to purchase? And particularly at that company, every single one of the interviews I did, they said they discovered us first through YouTube and watching our tutorial videos. Whereas if you looked at our acquisition marketing, you would say YouTube, content, has no value. Whereas actually it was priming very, very high value customers long term. So I think there's things like that look on the surface like there is no value to them, that actually potentially are incredibly valuable.
I'm glad you mentioned customer interviews, because look, this is something that grinds my gears with so many brands that we work with, and go, look, when is the last time you spoke to customers? Well, we don't do that. Why, number one, are people so scared to do it? And secondly, why is this something that I know, because I've heard you talk about it before, why is this something that you always do time and time again?
I think people are genuinely, I think there's two things: genuinely scared what customers are going to say. Oh, I hate you. I hate your brand. Don't want to have a conversation, like all of those things. And the second is like, oh, I just don't know what I'd say. What would I talk about? And it's like, well, you just get you get half a dozen questions that you'd be really interested in the answer to, and you just chat. And sometimes it's going to be a 5-minute chat, and sometimes it's going to be a 45-minute chat. You don't know till you go in there. And I will always say, chat to your highest value customers, because they're going to be the people who care enough. They're going to be flattered that, the founder of one of their favorite brands wants to talk to them. They're going to probably tell their friends that they spoke to you. It's picking the right people as well. But then baking in that culture of collecting feedback from customers and sharing it across the organization, it just makes your customers feel like real people, rather than like, oh, their numbers in a spreadsheet, kind of all of those things. It's like, no, actually, and we all do things that have impact on our customers' lives, and understanding that and having a window into that is very motivating for everyone, if nothing else, to be like, oh my God, I remember a story at Birchbox that it's the old days of Hermes career. Everyone used to hate Hermes so much they rebranded. And we used to do a quarterly customer survey, and we had an open question at the end: is there anything else you want to tell us? And this woman said that she'd been in a motorbike accident, and she'd lost her legs, and she was mostly housebound, and that when her Birchbox would arrive, her Hermes courier would knock on the door and would come in and make her a cup of tea and watch her open her Birchbox every month. And so that just was such a lovely story about how the impact on Birchbox on that woman's life, but also that insight into this courier that everyone hated. It's like, well, not universally.
Yeah, but it just, again, I think this is the thing, is that you can do whatever you like. All the stuff that we talk about at eCom Collab Club, unless that final moment is delivered and monitored and managed, it kind of doesn't really mean too much. And I think, look, it's a lovely story to hear because, like you say, unfortunately, I think, look, you know, our friends in logistics and shipping don't always get much praise. So that's a really nice one to hear. But look, in terms of stories as well, before you go, I cannot let you go without asking you, obviously, about Hugh Hefner. And we put this into the into the blurb about the podcast as well. So you organised Hugh Hefner's 80th, didn't you? And
I did.
I'm not sort of asking you for, you know, what organising Hugh Hefner's 80th birthday party told me about B2B sales, but it'd be great if you can tell us a bit about that, because I think people would love to know.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I spent most of the evening chasing bunny girls up and down the stairs at Cafe Royal. Yes, it was an entertaining evening, and it's an interesting thing, and particularly getting to meet Hef, and at the time the three girls from Girls of the Playboy Mansion was certainly something I will never forget.
I bet. And then look, you always, Janis, look, when obviously you come onto eCom Collab Club and come onto the podcast, I just love how natural it is to have a conversation with you, and someone with bags of experience is willing to give you time. I just want to say a massive thank you from me and obviously to everyone listening. So thank you so much, Janis. And if obviously people want to find out obviously more about obviously you and connect with you, and equally obviously about Clothes Doctor, what should they do? Where should they go?
Yeah, please go to clothes-doctor.com, and particularly, you know, stop buying big plastic bottles of detergent that are 90% water and the rest is mostly filler. There's a better way to do your laundry. And you can find me, Janis Thomas, on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in as well. If you have liked what you've listened to today, do give us a like or review on the listening platform of your choice. We'll be here again, same time next week with the eCom Collab Club Podcast. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the eCom Collab Club Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join our community at ecomcollabclub.com/community.